My husband laughed when I told him I finally got promoted. Not a happy laugh. Not proud. The kind of short, dismissive laugh someone gives when they think you're being unrealistic. Then he looked up from his phone and said, "That title doesn't actually mean anything, Claire. They just needed someone cheap." I remember standing in our kitchen holding 2 glasses of wine, trying to decide whether to argue or pretend the comment didn't hurt. In the end, I smiled weakly and sat down across from him like I always did. That had become my survival strategy after 8 years of marriage. Minimize conflict. Stay calm. Don't react emotionally. Because if Ethan thought you were emotional, he'd weaponize it against you for days. "You know I worked really hard for this," I said carefully. "I'm not saying you didn't," he replied casually. "I'm saying companies love promoting people without actually giving them power. Makes employees feel important." Then he went back to scrolling through his phone like the conversation was over. At the time, I told myself he was just stressed. Ethan had been unemployed for nearly 7 months. The tech company he worked for downsized unexpectedly, and since then everything in our apartment had become tense in quiet ways. Not screaming fights. Not dramatic scenes. Worse, passive aggression. Little comments. Long silences. Constant irritation hiding underneath ordinary conversations. Meanwhile, I was carrying almost everything financially. Rent, utilities, insurance, groceries, even part of Ethan's car payment after his savings started running low. So I ignored the comment and tried to enjoy my promotion anyway. I worked at a commercial architecture firm in Seattle called Urban Vista Design. Nothing glamorous. Mostly corporate buildings, mixed-use developments, and city planning projects. But I genuinely loved the work. I'd started there at 26 as a junior project coordinator and slowly worked my way up through years of impossible deadlines, demanding clients, and 12-hour workdays. The promotion to senior operations manager felt huge to me. Not because of the title, because it finally felt like proof that all those exhausting years meant something. The raise wasn't massive, but it mattered. An extra $28,000 annually plus performance bonuses. Enough to finally breathe a little financially. Enough that maybe I could stop feeling guilty every time I ordered takeout after working late. Enough that maybe Ethan and I could stop fighting about money. At least that's what I hoped. 3 weeks later, I found out my husband had secretly opened 3 credit cards in my name. I discovered it completely by accident. That Saturday morning I was sitting on the couch reviewing our monthly expenses because my banking app kept sending strange balance notifications. At first I assumed there was some technical issue. Then I noticed a payment to a credit account I didn't recognize. Northlake Financial Visa, minimum payment due. $184. I frowned immediately. We didn't have a Northlake Visa. I clicked into the account details expecting some kind of app error. Instead I saw a credit card under my name. Opened 11 months earlier. Current balance. $8,427. For several seconds I genuinely thought it had to be fraud. Identity theft maybe. Then I kept looking. There was another account. Silver Horizon MasterCard. Balance. $5,903. Then another. Cascade Rewards Platinum. Balance. $11,208. My stomach dropped so hard it physically hurt. 3 cards. Over $25,000 total. All under my name. My hands started shaking instantly. I opened my credit report. Hard inquiries everywhere. Multiple accounts. Late payment warnings. Debt utilization nearly maxed. And somehow I had never known. I sat frozen on the couch staring at the screen while panic slowly spread through my chest. Because suddenly dozens of confusing moments from the last year started making sense. The random mail Ethan insisted on sorting himself. The banking notifications I ignored because work kept me exhausted. The strange comments from our landlord asking whether everything was okay financially. The unexpected drop in my credit score I blamed on student loans. "Oh my God," I whispered out loud. At that exact moment, Ethan walked out of the bedroom wearing sweatpants and carrying coffee. He immediately noticed my face. What happened? I turned my laptop toward him silently, and I watched the color drain from his face. Not confusion. Recognition. That was the moment I knew. "You opened these?" I asked quietly. Ethan froze, then slowly sat down across from me. Claire. My entire body went cold. You used my identity? It's not what you think. People always say that. And somehow it's never once followed by anything good. Then explain it to me, I said. His voice became defensive immediately. I was going to pay them off. With what money? I've been interviewing. That's not an answer. He rubbed his forehead aggressively. You were stressed enough already, okay? I didn't want to dump more financial pressure on you. I stared at him in disbelief. So your solution was secretly opening credit cards in my name? It wasn't supposed to get this bad. That sentence terrified me more than yelling would have. Because it meant there was a point where he thought this was manageable. Reasonable even. How long? I asked quietly. He looked away. Around a year. A year. A full year of lying directly to my face while using my identity to survive financially. What did you spend $25,000 on? That question made him visibly uncomfortable. And suddenly I understood something even worse. The money wasn't just rent and groceries. Ethan. Silence. Answer me. Finally he muttered. Some of it was bills. Some of it. He exhaled sharply. My car. You already had a car. The lease was ending. I blinked slowly. You opened fraudulent accounts in my name, for a car? It's not fraud if we're married. That sentence changed something inside me permanently. Not because it was legally wrong. Because of how confidently he said it. Like marriage automatically erased consent. I stood up immediately. No. Claire. No, don't do that. My voice shook now. Do not act like I'm overreacting. I'm trying to explain. You committed identity fraud. His expression hardened instantly. Can you stop using dramatic words? I actually laughed then. A sharp, disbelieving laugh. Dramatic words? You know what I mean. No, Ethan, I really don't. He stood to now irritated. I was trying to keep us afloat. We were afloat. Barely. We had savings. Not enough. I stared at him. What else are you hiding from me? The silence that followed answered everything. My chest tightened immediately. How much? He didn't answer. How much, Ethan? Finally he muttered. There's a personal loan too. For a second I genuinely couldn't process the sentence. What? 12,000. I felt physically dizzy. $37,000. Nearly $40,000 of debt attached to my identity without my knowledge. And somehow the worst part wasn't even the money anymore. It was realizing my husband had looked me in the eyes every day for a year while building a financial disaster behind my back. I grabbed my coat immediately. Where are you going? He asked. My sister's. Claire, stop being irrational. That word again. Irrational. Emotional. Dramatic. Every disagreement somehow became proof that my feelings were invalid. I walked toward the door. Don't leave like this. I turned around slowly. Do you understand that you destroyed my credit? I can fix it. You already said that. I mean it. No, I said quietly. You mean you got caught? That hit him hard enough to finally shut him up. I left without another word. My older sister Natalie opened her apartment door 30 minutes later, and immediately knew something was wrong. What happened? I burst into tears before I could even answer. Not graceful crying either. The ugly kind. The kind where your body finally releases months of tension all at once. Natalie sat beside me on the couch while I explained everything. The credit cards. The loan. The lies. The year of deception. When I finished, she looked genuinely horrified. Claire, this is serious. I know. No, I mean legally serious. That word again. Legally. Fraud. Identity theft. Criminal. I still couldn't emotionally connect those words to Ethan. My husband. The man who made me coffee every morning. The man who rubbed my shoulders when I worked late. The man who remembered exactly how I liked my eggs. And somehow also the man secretly destroying my financial future. Natalie grabbed her laptop immediately. You need to freeze your credit right now. That night became a blur of panic and phone calls. Fraud departments. Credit bureaus. Bank representatives. Security verification questions. At one point a fraud specialist asked, "Do you know the individual who opened these accounts?" And hearing myself answer yes nearly broke me emotionally, as betrayal sounds different out loud. Around midnight, I finally checked my work email absent-mindedly. There was a message from HR. Subject: compensation adjustment error. At first I almost ignored it entirely. Then I opened the email. Claire, during an internal payroll audit, we discovered a discrepancy involving your direct deposit allocations. Please contact payroll administration Monday morning regarding a compensation issue requiring immediate review. My stomach dropped instantly. Another financial problem. Another hidden issue. For one terrifying second I thought Ethan somehow accessed my work accounts too. I barely slept that night. And by Monday morning, I had no idea my life was about to become exponentially worse. By Monday morning I felt like I had aged 5 years. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes I kept replaying the same thoughts over and over. How long had Ethan planned this? How many times had he lied directly to my face? How was I supposed to fix nearly $40,000 of fraudulent debt without destroying my marriage publicly? And somehow underneath all of that panic, another fear kept growing quietly. What exactly was wrong with my payroll? I arrived at Urban Vista Design just before 8. Seattle rain covered the office windows in gray streaks, and the entire building smelled like burnt espresso and printer paper. Normally work felt calming to me. Predictable. Structured. Safe. That morning I walked into the office feeling like every system in my life was collapsing simultaneously. Daniel from Payroll was already waiting outside my office. He looked uncomfortable immediately. "Hey Claire," he said carefully. "Do you have a minute?" That tone. The same cautious corporate tone people use before delivering terrible news. I followed him into a small conference room near HR. Inside sat Monica Reeves, head of finance, along with someone I'd never seen before. Mid-40s. Dark blue blazer. Legal pad. Very calm eyes. Monica stood up quickly. "Claire, thank you for coming in." My stomach tightened. "What's going on?" The unknown woman introduced herself first. Rebecca Sloan. External Financial Compliance Investigator. The word investigator immediately made my pulse spike. Monica gestured toward the chair. "Please sit." I sat slowly. Then Monica slid several printed documents across the table. "At the end of last week," she began carefully, "our payroll department identified irregularities connected to executive compensation distribution accounts." I frowned immediately. "What does that have to do with me?" Rebecca answered this time. "Your employee profile appears to be directly involved." For one horrifying second, I thought Ethan somehow stole from my company too. I actually felt nauseous. Rebecca continued calmly. "An additional direct deposit allocation was attached to your payroll account approximately 14 months ago." I stared at her blankly. "What?" Monica turned one of the pages toward me. There it was. Primary deposit, Claire Bennett. Secondary executive allocation, Horizon Business Solutions. I had never seen the second account before in my life. Rebecca folded her hands. "Over the last 14 months, approximately $82,000 in compensation intended for you was redirected into that secondary account." I stopped breathing for a second. "What?" Monica looked horrified for me. "We believe someone altered your payroll structure internally." $82,000. The number didn't even sound real. I stared at the documents while my brain tried desperately to process the information. Then suddenly dozens of moments from the past year rearranged themselves in my memory. The constant financial pressure despite my promotion. The feeling that somehow I was always falling behind. The guilt every time I spent money. The confusion about why my savings never grew despite working non-stop. I thought Ethan's secret debt explained everything. But now, someone else had been stealing from me too. Rebecca watched my face carefully. "We understand this is overwhelming." I laughed once. Not because anything was funny. Because my nervous system genuinely didn't know how else to react anymore. "You're telling me my husband secretly opened loans in my name," I said slowly. "And now my company is telling me someone has been stealing my salary too?" The room went silent. Monica blinked. "Your husband what?" I immediately regretted saying it out loud. Rebecca leaned forward slightly. "Claire, what exactly do you mean?" And suddenly everything exploded at once. I started crying before I could stop myself. Not controlled crying. Complete emotional collapse. The last 48 hours finally crushed me all at once. I explained everything. The credit cards. The fake loan. The debt. The confrontation. Leaving the apartment. Natalie helping me freeze my credit. By the time I finished, Monica looked physically stunned. Rebecca, meanwhile, became very still, like someone mentally connecting pieces together. "How long has your husband been unemployed?" she asked carefully. 7 months. "And before that?" "He worked in fintech software." Rebecca exchanged a look with Monica. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. "Claire," Rebecca said calmly, "does your husband have experience with financial systems or payroll platforms?" My entire body went cold. "Yes." Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then Rebecca opened another folder. We traced the unauthorized payroll modifications to a remote access point originating from a residential network in Bellevue. Bellevue. Our apartment. I felt the blood drain from my face instantly. "No." Rebecca didn't answer immediately. The unauthorized changes were executed using legitimate internal credentials. Monica looked sick now. "We initially suspected an internal payroll breach," she admitted quietly. "But the login behavior suggested someone familiar with corporate finance systems." I shook my head immediately. No, Ethan wouldn't. But even as I said it, memories started surfacing. Ethan borrowing my laptop constantly, asking casual questions about work software, making jokes about corporate incompetence, helping me set up remote access during the pandemic because he understood security better. Oh my God. Rebecca's voice remained calm. "We're not accusing anyone yet. But based on the timeline, technical methods, and financial overlap, your husband is currently part of the investigation." I felt like the floor disappeared beneath me, because suddenly this stopped being two separate betrayals. They were connected. Completely connected. Ethan hadn't just secretly created debt under my name. He had possibly been stealing from my company too. And if that was true, then every conversation about money suddenly became monstrous in retrospect. Every time he acted stressed, every argument about finances, every dismissive comment about my promotion, he already knew exactly how much money I should have been making. Because he was taking it. I covered my mouth with both hands. Oh my God. Monica quietly pushed tissues toward me. Rebecca opened another file. "There's more." That sentence nearly broke me. The secondary payroll account receiving the diverted funds was connected to an LLC created 11 months ago. "Horizon Business Solutions," I whispered. Rebecca nodded. "The business registration lists Ethan Bennett as the authorized operator." I stared at her. No denial left anymore. No confusion. No misunderstanding. Just truth. My husband had been systematically stealing from me for over a year. Not only through fraudulent loans and credit cards, but directly through my salary itself. Rebecca continued carefully. "We also discovered transfers from the LLC into personal accounts associated with luxury vehicle payments, travel expenses, electronics purchases, and cryptocurrency investments." Luxury vehicle. The car. The expensive watch Ethan claimed was discounted. The sudden obsession with crypto trading. Weekend trips with friends he somehow still afforded despite unemployment. Every piece clicked together now with horrifying clarity. I felt physically sick. "How much total?" I asked quietly. Rebecca looked down at her notes. Between the payroll diversions, fraudulent debt accounts, and related financial activity, approximately $123,000. $123,000. I genuinely thought I might faint. Monica whispered, "Jesus Christ." And suddenly I understood something terrifying. Ethan never panicked about money the way I did. Because he knew exactly where money was coming from. Me. Just not with my permission. Rebecca finally asked the question I dreaded most. "Does Ethan know the company discovered the payroll discrepancies?" I shook my head slowly. "No." "Good." That single word frightened me. Rebecca explained that corporate counsel and federal financial investigators were already involved due to interstate banking violations and digital fraud statutes. Which meant this was no longer private. No longer a marriage problem. No longer something fixable through therapy or arguments or apologies. This was criminal. Real criminal. We strongly advise against contacting him yet, Rebecca said. At least until law enforcement finishes preliminary asset tracing. Asset tracing. I couldn't believe these words were connected to my life. Monica finally spoke again softly. Claire, we're going to reimburse the missing compensation immediately. I blinked at her. What? Urban Vista carries fraud protection insurance for payroll breaches. She paused carefully. None of this was your fault. That sentence almost made me cry again. Because somewhere deep down, part of me still blamed myself. For trusting him. For missing signs. For building a life beside someone capable of this. Rebecca stood slowly. There's one more thing you need to prepare for. I looked up at her. If Ethan accessed your company systems through your credentials, investigators may temporarily need your devices for forensic review. I nodded automatically. Anything. I would have agreed to anything at that point. Rebecca handed me her card before leaving. If Ethan contacts you unexpectedly, call me immediately. And suddenly that frightened me more than everything else combined. Because until that moment, part of me still imagined Ethan as my husband. A liar maybe. A desperate man. But still Ethan. Now federal investigators were treating him like a financial criminal dangerous enough to monitor carefully. I left work early that afternoon in complete emotional shock. Rain hammered the streets outside while Seattle traffic crawled endlessly beneath gray skies. I sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes unable to drive. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Where are you? We need to talk. My stomach twisted immediately. Another message arrived seconds later. You froze the credit accounts? Then another. Claire, answer me. Then finally. Did you tell your company something? I stared at the screen in complete silence. Because suddenly I realized something terrifying. He knew. He knew the investigation had started. And I had no idea what he might do next. I didn't answer Ethan's messages. Not because I suddenly felt brave. Because I genuinely didn't know what to say anymore. Every version of the conversation in my head ended badly. If I lied, he'd probably know. If I told the truth, he might panic. And if federal investigators were right about the scale of what he'd done, panic was dangerous. My phone buzzed again while rain slammed against the windshield. Ethan calling. I declined immediately. Then another call. Then another. Finally a voicemail notification appeared. I listened to it without meaning to. Claire, please pick up the phone, he said sharply. You're making this way bigger than it needs to be. That sentence made my chest tighten. Because even now, after everything, he still spoke like I was the irrational one. Not him. The man secretly stealing from his wife. I drove straight back to Natalie's apartment afterward. The second she opened the door, she knew something had gotten worse. What happened now? I sat at her kitchen counter and told her everything. The payroll fraud. The fake LLC. The stolen salary. Rebecca. Federal investigators. By the time I finished, Natalie looked stunned. Claire, she whispered. Your husband is literally a criminal. Hearing someone say it out loud felt surreal. Because despite everything, part of my brain still resisted that word. Criminal. I kept remembering ordinary things instead. Ethan making pancakes on Sundays. Ethan rubbing my feet after long workdays. Ethan crying when his father died. How could both versions of him exist at once? Natalie grabbed my phone before I could stop her. You're not answering him tonight. I wasn't going to. Yes, you were. Unfortunately, she was right. Some part of me still wanted explanations. Still wanted him to somehow convince me this wasn't as terrible as it looked. Trauma does strange things to loyalty. Around 7 that evening, Rebecca called. Claire. Where are you currently? At my sister's apartment. Good. Stay there tonight. The seriousness in her voice immediately scared me. What happened? There's been movement on several financial accounts connected to Ethan. My stomach dropped. What kind of movement? Large withdrawals. Cryptocurrency liquidations. Attempted international wire transfers. Oh my God. We believe he realizes the investigation has escalated. I pressed my hand against my forehead. So what happens now? There was a brief pause. Federal agents are preparing a warrant request. Everything suddenly felt unreal again. Warrants. agents, financial crimes. These sounded like words from documentaries, not my marriage. Rebecca continued carefully. Claire, has Ethan ever behaved aggressively toward you? The question caught me off guard. No. Never. He gets angry sometimes, but... I hesitated. No. Never physically. Okay. She paused again. Even so, do not meet him alone. That frightened me more than I wanted to admit. Because if investigators felt the need to say that, then Ethan's situation was much worse than I fully understood. An hour later my phone started vibrating nonstop again. Texts, calls, voicemails. First angry, then desperate. Claire, please just talk to me. You don't understand what's happening. I can explain everything. Then finally, if you tell them everything, my life is over. I stared at that message for a long time. Not because it manipulated me. Because of what it didn't say. No apology. No concern for me. No acknowledgement of what he'd done. Just fear for himself. And somehow that hurt more than the fraud itself. Around 10:30 there was a knock at Natalie's apartment door. Both of us froze instantly. Natalie looked through the peephole first. Then turned toward me slowly. It's Ethan. My entire body went cold. Another knock. Claire, please open the door. Natalie immediately whispered. Call Rebecca. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands. Outside, Ethan kept talking through the door. I know you're in there. He sounded exhausted. Not angry. Almost panicked. Claire, I'm begging you. Natalie mouthed. Don't open it. I nodded immediately. Rebecca answered on the second ring. He's here, I whispered. Her voice changed instantly. Do not open the door. Officers are already en route. Outside, Ethan kept speaking. You don't understand how bad this got. I felt tears forming immediately. Because part of me still recognized his voice emotionally, even while my brain understood I couldn't trust anything he said anymore. I never meant for it to spiral like this, he continued quietly. Natalie crossed her arms. Convenient. Then Ethan said something that made my blood run cold. They were going to fire you eventually anyway. I frowned. What? You think those people care about you? He said through the door. I was protecting us. Protecting us. The delusion inside that sentence genuinely terrified me. Because suddenly I realized Ethan might actually believe his own justification. I stepped closer to the door despite Natalie trying to stop me. Protecting us? I said loudly. You stole over $100,000 from me. Silence for a second. Then Ethan answered quietly. I was going to replace it. With what money? Another silence. Then his voice hardened slightly. You wouldn't understand the pressure I was under. I almost laughed. The pressure. I repeated. I was working 60-hour weeks while wondering why we were drowning financially. You think I enjoyed any of this? Yes. I snapped back immediately. Actually, I do. That silence lasted longer. Then finally he said quietly, I didn't think you'd notice. And somehow that sentence broke something inside me completely. Not because it was cruel. Because it was honest. He genuinely believed I was too distracted, too trusting, too exhausted to see what he was doing. And for over a year. He was right. A few minutes later, flashing police lights reflected through Natalie's apartment windows. Everything happened quickly after that. Voices outside. Commands. Movement in the hallway. Then silence. Natalie looked through the peephole again. They took him. I sat down on the couch immediately because my legs suddenly felt weak. And for the first time since discovering the debt, I cried specifically for my marriage. Not for the money. Not for the investigation. For the realization that the person I thought I married probably never truly existed the way I imagined. The next morning Rebecca called again. Ethan had been detained for questioning while federal investigators executed search warrants on our apartment, electronic devices, and financial records. The evidence they found was apparently overwhelming. Encrypted spreadsheets tracking diverted payroll funds, fake account documentation, instructions for bypassing multi-factor authentication systems, detailed notes about my compensation structure at Urban Vista, even projected estimates for future bonuses and raises. He had literally calculated my financial value over time, like I was an investment portfolio instead of his wife. I stopped crying after hearing that. Not because I felt stronger, because something inside me emotionally shut down. 3 days later I met with Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Levin downtown. He explained the charges calmly while I sat there numb. Wire fraud, identity theft, unauthorized access to protected systems, financial cybercrime, tax violations, potential federal prison sentence exceeding 15 years. I stared at him blankly. This doesn't feel real. Levin nodded sympathetically. It rarely does for spouses. Spouses. The word hit differently now. As if I technically still belonged to Ethan somehow even after everything. Levin slid another folder across the table. There's something else you should prepare for. Inside were photographs, luxury hotel receipts, travel bookings, restaurant charges. At first I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I saw her name. Vanessa Cole. Repeated over and over. Flights, spa reservations, jewelry purchases, weekend resorts. All paid using the fraudulent accounts connected to my identity. I looked up slowly. Who is she? Levin hesitated carefully. We believe she was involved romantically with Ethan for approximately 8 months. For several seconds I genuinely couldn't breathe. Not because I loved Ethan at that point. Because betrayal apparently still had layers left. I laughed suddenly. A sharp broken sound. Of course there was another woman. Of course my stolen salary funded romantic weekends while I worried about grocery expenses. The humiliation burned hotter than the anger. How much? I whispered. Levin checked the file. Approximately $30,000 connected to travel and luxury spending. $30,000. I remembered crying in Target once because my debit card declined unexpectedly after rent cleared. Meanwhile, Ethan was buying champagne in Vancouver with someone else using money stolen from me. I covered my eyes with both hands. I feel stupid. Levin's voice softened immediately. You are not stupid, Claire. I missed everything. No, he corrected gently. You trusted someone you loved. I wanted to believe there was a difference. But emotionally it didn't feel that way yet. That night I finally returned to the apartment with investigators present while Ethan remained in custody. I barely recognized the place. Not physically. Emotionally. Every object suddenly felt contaminated somehow. The kitchen where we drank coffee every morning. The couch where we watched movies. The desk where Ethan secretly manipulated my financial life while I slept in the next room. Investigators photographed electronics while I packed essentials quietly into boxes. Then, while clearing a kitchen drawer, I found something that nearly destroyed me emotionally. A folded piece of paper. My promotion announcement from Urban Vista. The one I brought home months earlier. Across the bottom Ethan had written calculations in black ink. Projected raise increase. Bonus estimates. Potential payroll diversion percentages. I stared at the page in complete silence. Even the happiest moment of my professional life had become financial planning material to him. One of the investigators quietly took the paper from my hands. Are you okay? I looked around the apartment one final time. And for the first time since all this began, the answer came easily. No, I whispered. I really don't think I am. Ethan accepted a federal plea agreement 6 months later. There was never going to be a trial. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Digital records, bank transfers, encrypted spreadsheets, access logs tied directly to our apartment network. Even handwritten notes outlining projected payroll theft increases based on my future promotions. According to investigators, he had originally planned to stop after taking $20,000. Then another emergency happened. Then another. Then greed replaced panic. That was the part Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Levin explained to me quietly after one of our final meetings. These cases almost always escalate, he said. Once someone succeeds without consequences, their internal justification grows. Internal justification. Such a clean phrase for something that destroyed my marriage. By the time sentencing arrived, I barely recognized my own life anymore. I was living temporarily in a small furnished apartment downtown, while final divorce paperwork moved through court. Urban Vista reimbursed the stolen payroll funds through insurance coverage, but repairing my personal credit history took months. Every fraudulent account had to be disputed individually. Every loan. Every late payment. Every financial scar Ethan left behind. The worst part wasn't even the paperwork. It was how humiliating the process felt. Having to repeatedly explain to strangers that yes, my husband secretly stole my identity. Yes, we were married the entire time. Yes, I somehow didn't know. Each conversation reopened the same wound. And underneath all of it lived another painful truth I hated admitting. I still missed him sometimes. Not the real Ethan. The version I thought existed. The man I believed I married. Grief becomes confusing when the person is still alive. Sentencing happened on a cold Thursday morning in January. Rain hammered the courthouse windows while reporters crowded near the entrance downstairs. Apparently the case had gained media attention after details about the corporate payroll fraud became public. Cybersecurity expert steals over $120,000 from wife and employer. Seeing headlines like that felt surreal. Like reading about strangers instead of my own life. Natalie sat beside me inside the courtroom while we waited for proceedings to begin. "You okay?" she whispered. "No." At least by then I'd stopped pretending otherwise. Ethan entered wearing a dark gray suit instead of prison clothes. For a second my chest tightened automatically. Familiar posture. Familiar walk. The same man who used to fall asleep on the couch halfway through movies. The same man who once drove 3 hours at midnight, because I casually mentioned craving pie from a bakery near Portland. Memory can be cruel like that. It keeps offering tenderness connected to people who no longer deserve it. Ethan looked thinner than before. Older too. The confidence he carried for years seemed completely gone now. He looked exhausted. Judge Marion Holloway reviewed the charges carefully. Wire fraud. Identity theft. Unauthorized financial access. Corporate cybercrime. Tax evasion. Fraudulent financial instruments. The prosecutors outlined everything in brutal detail. The fake LLC. The payroll diversion system. The fraudulent credit accounts under my identity. The luxury spending. The affair. The attempts to move assets internationally after discovering the investigation. Listening to everything summarized clinically inside a courtroom made the situation sound even more horrifying somehow. Because stripped of emotion and history, Ethan's actions looked exactly like what they were. Predatory. Calculated. Deliberate. His attorney argued emotional instability after unemployment. Financial panic. Depression. Fear of failure. And honestly, part of me believed some of that was true. But another part understood something equally important. Plenty of people lose jobs without secretly stealing from their spouses. Eventually Judge Holloway asked whether I wanted to read my victim impact statement aloud. For several seconds I considered declining. Then I stood. My hands shook immediately. But once I started speaking, my voice steadied. "I spent over a year believing I was failing financially," I said quietly. "I thought I wasn't working hard enough. I thought I was irresponsible with money. I blamed myself constantly while someone else secretly controlled my financial life behind my back." The courtroom stayed silent. I looked toward Ethan briefly. He stared at the table. "You didn't just steal money," I continued. "You stole stability. You stole trust. You made me question my own judgment, intelligence, and reality." My throat tightened slightly. But the worst part is this. Even after everything, part of me still remembers loving you. And I honestly think that's the hardest thing to live with. For the first time since entering the courtroom, Ethan looked directly at me. His eyes filled immediately. But by then it didn't matter anymore. Judge Holloway sentenced him to 11 years in federal prison. Restitution payments. Financial monitoring after release. Permanent restrictions on handling corporate financial systems. When the sentence ended, Ethan closed his eyes briefly like he already knew it was coming. As officers escorted him away, he looked back toward me once. Not dramatically. Not like movies. Just one quiet look filled with something between regret and disbelief. Then he disappeared through the side door. And my marriage officially ended. I expected to feel relief afterward. Instead, I mostly felt empty. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions while cameras flashed through the rain. Natalie guided me toward the parking garage before anyone could stop us. Halfway there, she suddenly hugged me so tightly I almost started crying again. "You survived this," she whispered. At the time, I didn't fully believe her. Because survival after betrayal doesn't feel heroic. Feels exhausting. The divorce finalized 4 months later. I kept almost nothing from the marriage. No furniture. No shared accounts. No apartment. I wanted distance from every version of that life. Urban Vista eventually promoted me again the following year. Director of Operations. Larger salary. Leadership responsibilities. Ironically, my financial future recovered faster than I expected. But emotionally, recovery moved differently. Slower. Messier. More complicated. For nearly a year afterward, I checked every bank notification obsessively. Every transaction. Every email. Every login alert. I changed passwords constantly. Reviewed credit reports weekly. Locked everything. Verified everything. Trauma rewires ordinary habits quietly. At first I hated how suspicious I became. Then eventually I understood something important. Caution wasn't weakness. It was adaptation. About 18 months after sentencing, I finally started therapy. Real therapy. Not self-help podcasts. Not pretending I was fine because technically the crisis ended. Actual difficult conversations where I admitted how deeply humiliated I felt. One afternoon my therapist asked me a question that stayed with me permanently. Why do you blame yourself more than Ethan? I stared at her silently because I didn't have a good answer. Eventually I whispered. Because I should have noticed. She shook her head gently. You trusted your husband. That's normal human behavior, Claire. I cried in my car for nearly an hour after that session. Because deep down I had spent years treating my own trust like evidence of stupidity. But trust itself wasn't the problem. His betrayal was. 3 years later, life looked completely different. I bought a townhouse near the water north of Seattle. Small place. Large windows. Quiet mornings. Peace. Real peace. Not the fragile version I used to mistake for peace inside my marriage. Natalie joked that I finally stopped apologizing every time I spent money on myself. She wasn't wrong. For years I treated basic comfort like guilt. Now I understood stability mattered too. One evening after work, Monica from Urban Vista invited me to speak during an internal cybersecurity ethics seminar. At first I refused immediately. Then she said something that changed my mind. People need to understand how personal financial crime really is. So I stood in front of 200 employees and told them the truth. Not dramatically. Not emotionally. Just honestly. How easy it becomes to ignore financial discrepancies while overwhelmed with life. How manipulation inside relationships grows slowly enough to feel normal. How intelligent people still get deceived because deception depends on trust. Afterwards, several employees approached me privately. One woman discovered unauthorized subscriptions and hidden debt her partner created using shared accounts. Another employee realized an ex-boyfriend still had access to old financial passwords. For the first time since everything happened, the experience felt useful instead of purely painful. Like maybe something meaningful could still exist inside all that damage. Last year, I received the final restitution payment. Almost 5 years after the investigation began. I stared at the notification quietly while sitting alone in my kitchen. Not because of the money, because of what it represented. Closure. Or at least the closest version real life offers. That night rain moved softly against the windows while Seattle lights reflected across the water outside. And for the first time in years I realized something surprising. Ethan didn't ruin my future. He damaged it, delayed it, complicated it. But he didn't destroy it. Because despite everything, I still built a life he could never steal from me. A life based on peace instead of performance. Trust earned slowly instead of given automatically. And maybe most importantly, a life where I finally understood that surviving betrayal does not make you weak. Sometimes it's the clearest proof that you're stronger than the person who tried to break you.